The Palestinian President has urged to suspend recognition of Israel. It's a further expression of Palestinian anger following Donald Trump's decision on Jerusalem. But what are the consequences of cutting ties with Israel? And do Palestinians have alternative options? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Elizabeth Puranam. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has called Donald Trump's peace efforts the slap of the century and promised a slap back. Now the Palestinian Liberation Organisation has outlined its strategy to face the US president's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital. The core demands are to suspend Palestinian recognition of Israel and to no longer regard the US as a partner for peace. We'll discuss the implications with our guests in a moment, but first Imran Khan reports from the occupied West Bank.
Late on Monday night, the Palestinian leadership issued a statement that could have far-reaching consequences for the peace process. The statement includes the call to suspend recognition of Israel, suspend security coordination with it, and unite the Palestinian factions through reconciliation. The statement comes from the Central Council of the PLO after 2 days of meetings. It'll be discussed further by the PLO Executive Committee, and it's up to that committee to implement them as policy at some point in the future. The statement also said that the US is no longer a partner for peace and that the Palestinians want international involvement. But given that the US is perhaps the only country that can put pressure on Israel, will this work?
We have to utilize different forms of accountability for Israel. It has to know that this occupation, this form of brutal colonialism can no longer be accepted. And therefore we have to go to the International Criminal Court. We have to go to the International Court of Justice. We have to join organizations and accede to charters and conventions that would protect us on the one hand and hold Israel to account.
The US President Donald Trump has said he will cut US aid to the Palestinians. If that happens, there will be an economic impact. This factory produces extract of olive leaf tablets and is part of a multi-million-dollar project to encourage enterprise in Jericho, the occupied West Bank. The factory was set up in this industrial zone with Japanese investment. Without it, it wouldn't have been successful. For the operations manager here, it shows that there are alternatives to the US.
For example, the Japanese, lots of other governments, they showed interest in helping the Palestinian economy. There are lots of other options.
Once it's complete, this Japanese-funded industrial zone will house around 5,000 workers, and that's going to have a positive impact, not just here locally, but across the Palestinian territories. Now, if you speak to Palestinians, what they'll tell you is oftentimes foreign aid, unlike US aid, comes without strings and preconditions. But it's not just economics, politics also plays a key role. According to one analyst, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has options.
He is trying to tell the international community that I will be going to the United Nations time after time, and he's trying to say that I will be patient, I will stop looking for two-state solutions if you are not ready for it, if the Israelis are not ready for it.
Despite Palestinian confidence that there is an alternative to US involvement in the peace process, how the international community will react is key. At some point, the Israelis and the Palestinians will need some sort of framework for talks. Without the US, what that will look like is currently unknown. Imran Khan, Al Jazeera, occupied West Bank.
Well, let's bring in our guest now. Joining us via Skype from Nablus in the West Bank, Abdul Sattar Qassem, Professor of Political Science and columnist for Middle East Monitor. In Tel Aviv, Yosi Beilin, former Israeli cabinet minister, and in Paris, Rula Jebreal, Professor of Communication at the University of Miami. Welcome to you all. Mr. Qassem, the PLO Central Council has said that they do not recognize the state of Israel. You have watched Palestinian politics for a very long time. Is this an indication of just how bad things are?
Yeah, things are so bad. And probably you need to ask the people in the street how bad it is. They are suffering a lot all the time. But anyhow, the PLO Central Council did not say that they don't recognize Israel. but they have been talking about a temporary withdrawal of recognition until Israel recognizes the state of Palestine and stops the settlement activities. In other words, the council, the Central Committee, is still recognizing Israel conditionally. And that's not even acceptable by the Palestinians. The Palestinians were hoping that the PLO will withdraw completely its recognition of Israel, because this recognition has not brought us anything profitable. On the contrary, we have been suffering because of the negotiations process and because of the false and fake promises of the United States.
Mr. Jebreal, let me go to you and pick up on what Mr. Qassem is saying. Just how realistic is a complete withdrawal from the peace process that started with Oslo in 1993, with no longer recognizing Israel, given the reality on the ground, the cooperation between Israel and Palestinian entities in running the Palestinian territories?
I don't think the PLO was mentioning, or even the president himself, recognizing Israel. It's recognizing the leadership of Bibi Netanyahu as a viable partner for peace. De facto, the peace process is dead. It's been dead for a while. It's now to recognize the reality on the ground and formulate new paradigm. This leadership, the Palestinian Authority, led by Mahmoud Abbas, has failed spectacularly. They promised the Palestinians sovereignty, equality, and freedom. None of these things has been delivered ever. The peace process was there for the sake of peace, for the peace process. It was a fig leaf. The settlement activity continued. The colonization activity continued. We are looking at a one-state reality. It's a binational state. It's an apartheid state. This is what former Prime Minister Ehud Olmert and Ehud Barak actually said that Israel is. Today, Israel is an ethno-religious project of purity and exclusion. We have, as Palestinians and as Israeli, we have to look at reality as is, not as our leaders are stating that they would love it to be. The truth is, now the Palestinian national movement needs to formulate a new vision, and also open the door. Abbas is 82. I think it's time for him to acknowledge his failure, and for him to open the door for new leaders, for new ideas and a new vision. Look, yesterday was the day of Martin Luther King. The Israeli Declaration of Independence talked about equal rights for all inhabitants, regardless their ethnicity, their gender, and their religion. It's time to acknowledge that Israel controls the whole territory between the sea and the river. Even the ambassador of America in Israel, Friedman, who is somebody who financed settlement activity, talked about lifting the term occupation, never use it, because this is the whole land is the land of Israel. It's time to acknowledge that the population that lives there deserve equal rights, as the Declaration of Independence of Israel called for.
And this is why Mr. Abbas said that he would not actually meet with Mr. Friedman, because he doesn't even want the use of the word occupation by the Americans. Mr. Beilin, if I can bring you in now, how do you think the Israelis...
He finance activity.
Yeah, Mr. Beilin, how do you think the Israelis and the Israeli government will be looking on at what's come out of this PLO Central Council meeting? We have heard from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu saying that actually Mahmoud Abbas has only served Israel's interests. He said that he exposed what we have been saying all the time, that the root of the conflict is the basic refusal to recognize a Jewish state in any borders. I mean, did Mr. Abbas's speech recommendations play into Benjamin Netanyahu's hands?
Well, we are having a very rightist government in Israel, the most rightist one ever. This government doesn't believe in a real agreement with the Palestinians. They theoretically are for peace, but without paying the price for peace. As a result of it, what the government spokesmen are saying all the time is that it is not a territorial issue, not even on Jerusalem, not even the number of refugees or exactly the border, but it is something which is perhaps religious or perhaps very, very far in distance in its origin, and it cannot be solved by just sitting together and having something like the Clinton parameters or the Geneva initiative. Now, by what was said about the Balfour Declaration in the past and about 48 and whatever, in the eyes of Netanyahu, is strengthening the feeling that it is insoluble. If it is insoluble, then you don't have to do anything. Of course, I cannot agree with something like that, but I believe that Mahmoud Abbas, President Abbas, missed the point in his speech. Rather than saying something very, very concrete, like after 25 years, I decide to dissolve the Palestinian Authority, which I believe is timely, or something which could be very, very concrete. Like even the idea that if nothing is happening right now, we should now work very seriously on the option of one person, one vote. Of course, many Israelis would like to do whatever possible in order to prevent it, and it might urge negotiations. Right now, the situation is quite convenient for the current Israeli government, and I don't think that neither the speech of the other day of President Abbas nor the resolutions of the Council are changing something for the current government.
Well, let's look at how we have got to this point. Despite many peace plans over the years, little progress has been made. Among the main sticking points, Israeli leaders say Jerusalem is the indivisible capital of Israel. Palestinian leaders want occupied East Jerusalem as the capital of their future state. Palestinians demand the borders of their new state includes the occupied West Bank, occupied East Jerusalem and the Gaza Strip. Israeli leaders insist most of those areas should be part of Israel. Another major stumbling block, the right of return for around 5 million Palestinian refugees scattered all over the world. Well, their families fled in 1948 when Israel was created. Israel refuses to support the return of any of them. Mr. Abdul, Sattar, Qassem, well, here we are now. Yosi Beilin was saying that this was something of even a missed opportunity by Mahmoud Abbas, that these recommendations are not concrete enough. So what does the PLO need to do now?
They are not concrete enough, that's true, because they do not meet the aspirations of the Palestinians. We want complete withdrawal from Oslo Accords, and we should withdraw the recognition of Israel, and we should be back to armed resistance against the Israelis. We should understand that the Israelis are not occupying us with roses and flowers. They are occupying us with American and war planes coming from the United States. They are using force against us to maintain their own occupation of our land. And that is by definition terrorism. If we want to talk about international terrorism, Israel is a leader of international terrorism and it's backed by the United States. So we should defend ourselves and we should defend our rights. Our rights are of two major points. First, the return of the refugees. There are millions of Palestinian refugees who should be back to their homes and property. Until now, the international community, represented by the United States, has not been talking about this basic human right.
No, Mr. Qassem, and
Second is the right to self-determination.
Yes, and you are bringing up the issues.
In the world,
yes, you are bringing up the issues that have been the main sticking points where there has been no progress on. Ms. Jebreal, if I can bring you in now, who can defend the rights of the Palestinians in this conflict now that they no longer want to deal with the United States?
Look, Palestinians are fighting for their existence and continuation as a nation. No doubt, this is a critical moment for the Palestinian history and the Palestinian people. They've been abandoned by the most Arab leaders. starting with Saudi Arabia. They're abandoned by Saudi Arabia, and the Arab countries are focused on something else. It's not a main issue, as I think the Bahraini foreign minister tweeted, it's a side issue. Americans are 100% pro-Bibi Netanyahu, not even pro the Israelis, where the majority, not the majority, there's a camp that Yosi Beilin talks about and talked to, which wants actually a democratic Israeli state with equality maybe for all, or at least a federation, a co-federation. The Palestinians need to seek protection from the international community. Mm-hmm. I think the balance or the disbalance of power is in Israel's favor, whether it's economically or militarily. We cannot think back we cannot roll back these 25 years. However, I truly believe, exactly like the rest of the world, exactly like South Africa or the African American community in America, the civil rights movement starts now and started the moment Bibi Netanyahu started rebuilding settlements and making the settlements center for his policy and policies of segregation and discrimination. America has elected the first African American president, President Obama. This is what democracy is about. It's rule to be rule and rule in turn. It's participation. It's one man, one vote. And I believe this is where the conflict needs to be and where the struggle needs to start. Israelis, especially like people like Yosi Beilin and others, need to start fighting for the democratic soul of their government and of their country. Otherwise, we are looking at an extreme religious right wing that wants purity and exclusion, even of people, from people like Mr. Beilin, who is a liberal and a real Democrat.
Mr. Beilin, I do want to bring you in here because I asked Rula Jebreal who could be an alternative to the US as a mediator in peace talks, and we talked about who can no longer play that role. And I guess that's one of the big problems in this peace process is who can replace the US, which is no longer seen as an honest broker. Mr. Jebreal spoke of, Arab states who are not championing the Palestinian cause like they might once have. Mahmoud Abbas did speak about, possible alternatives, the Arab initiative, the roadmap. But do you think Israel would be interested in these initiatives where they get a normalizing of ties from Arab states, when that seems to be happening anyway somewhat behind the scenes because their ally, the United States, wants Arab Gulf states in the region to normalize ties with Israel?
Yeah, but there is no secret normalization. Normalization is normalization with tourism and culture and whatever. What we are having today is the status of a concubine. I mean, Israel has undoubtedly some unknown, or some of them are a little bit known, connections with the leadership in the Arab world, but not with the Arab world itself. And it is not normalization in my view. But if we are speaking about who might defend the Palestinians, not by asking them to begin now terrorism, it will bring them nowhere, or bringing here 5 million refugees, then it is, of course, the end of Israel for Israelis like myself. The issue of the refugees should be solved, but not in that way. At the end of the day, my belief is that what we have to do is to defend each other. That the peace camp in Israel, which is big, it is not a marginal one, and the peace camp in Palestine, which is also big, should help each other. I mean, we went to Oslo without the Americans or the Europeans or anybody. The Norwegians were facilitators. That's all. They went out of the room when we negotiated. We negotiated with Jordan without President Clinton, without the Americans. They all helped us eventually with financial assistance and whatever, but not in the initiative and not in the negotiations. We don't need a kind of help from the parents in order to sit together. We know each other well. We can talk to each other if we really want peace. Those of us who do not will always find excuses why not to sit together.
Yeah.
And of course, the issue of leadership, regretfully on both sides, is something which has to be tackled.
Ms. Jebreal, I can see you wanting to come in.
Yes. Yosi, I'm sorry to say, we had consecutive government on the left and on the right on Israel. However, none of them implemented really the promises of the Oslo Agreement. It failed. We need to acknowledge that it's a failed process. 25 years after, we have more settlements, more entrenched occupation. It's time to look at the reality. We are one state, a binational state. It's an apartheid state. It's now to call it for what it is and not pretend that it's something else. Whatever Abbas is saying, he is 80-year-old. He is declaring actually his failure by saying what he said. It's now to create a new paradigm. I agree with you that, but the peace camp in Israel, the labor camp that campaigned, where the leader of that camp in the last election said, we are not the one that love Arabs. We actually agree with most of these policies that Bibi Netanyahu is enacting in the West Bank, in the occupied territories, in Gaza. So you have an issue inside Israel where the right wing is cannibalizing all the ideas and basically winning over and again. So we need to decide that this civil rights movement must start with Israelis and Palestinian, progressive Israelis, but you still have this entrenched racism and bigotry inside even the left camp. And we need to speak about it in a clear-cut way. Exactly like Americans are speaking about their president as a racist president, calling him out. Your camp needs to come out and call out these racist laws that are enacted against even Palestinians with an Israeli passport.
Mr. Qassem, let me bring you in now. What do you make of what Ms. Jebreal is saying? You know, what can the Palestinians, what can the PLO, what can Mahmoud Abbas achieve with the politics of Israel as they are?
Now, Mahmoud Abbas doesn't have any legal status. His mandate ended in 2009. He is another Arab dictator. He does not represent the Palestinians. He should leave.
Who will take his who do you think should take his place now if he wants to step down?
There should be democratic elections, but these guys do not believe in democracy. Mahmoud Abbas and all of his court do not believe in democracy. They should leave. They have failed. They haven't achieved anything for the Palestinians over 25 years. And we are fed up with the situation. They have been a complete failure, and we should elect new leaders. That's the way it should be done.
And how likely do you think that is, Mr. Qassem? Because there has been talk of elections for a long time now. We know they are long overdue. There's also a lot of talk of, reconciliation between the main Palestinian factions. And yet, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, did not turn up to this PLO Central Council meeting. So before the Palestinians can deal with Israel and the international community, do they have their house in order?
The Hamas and Jihad did the right thing. They are not members in the PLO. And why they should go to the meeting of the Central Council? It's meaningless to attend that meeting. And you see that the resolutions reached by the Central Council do not respond to the Palestinian demands.
I understand what you're saying. We only have a minute left in the program, and I would like to ask our other guests a very quick question. Mr. Beilin, the reality on the ground, Israel will have to be part of the solution. How do you get the Israeli political system to accept the resolutions being proposed?
Well, I believe that we are not far from changing our government. The government today, the coalition today, is not a very strong one. It's based on very few members of Knesset, and I hope that in the next elections, the center-left will win it, and parties like my party, Meretz, will be part of such a coalition, and will actually do whatever they can in order to get back to the negotiating table. We know the solutions. We don't have to begin from zero, from scratch.
Well, thank you to all our guests, Abdul, Sattar, Qassem in Nablus, Yosi, Beilin in Tel Aviv, and Rula, Jebreal in Paris. And thank you too for watching. You can see the program again anytime by visiting our website, aljazeera.com. And for further discussion, go to our Facebook page. That's facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also join the conversation on Twitter. Our handle is @AJ Inside Story. From me, Elizabeth Puranam, and the whole team here, bye for now.